The reality of a museum buried underground for centuries. Why it has sent shockwaves around the world. Every item collected inside completely overturns people's understanding of the species that exist in today's world. On the homepage of the official website of the Merlin Museum, you can clearly see a large number of bizarre creature photos. Some look like dragons, some like elves, some like horned demons, and others like vampiric sea creatures, etc. And underneath each specimen, there is a clear record. Home of Vampirus. The vampire, the DNA, like nothing I've ever seen before. Let's turn back to around the 1960s. During the demolition of a building in London, UK, a group of workers accidentally uncovered an underground chamber, a hidden chamber. Inside were placed over 1,000 sealed wooden crates. When a scholar on site opened one of the crates, he stood frozen, stunned for a long time. Within each crate was stored entities that seemed completely different from anything in this world. Others couldn't help but gasp in astonishment upon seeing them, as if they had entered a mysterious dark world. And within the crates were the legendary mermaids, elves and dragons, werewolves and vampires, as well as various living specimens of creatures from the Cthulhu mythos. And these entities, some originated from records in religious cultures, while many more came from myths and legends. Could these creatures have truly existed in this world? Otherwise, where did these living specimens come from? To investigate these specimens, some scholars found relevant records. They discovered that this house and the underground chamber beneath it, along with all the mysterious specimens, all belonged to a man named Thomas Theodore Merlin, the man, and thus the museum was born. It was named the Merlin Museum. Today, the Merlin Museum has an online exhibition managed by a man named Eric. And all these strange and bizarre collections are under his safekeeping for years. Many scientists and amateur enthusiasts have tried to study the collections, but have all been turned away by him, which has left the authenticity of these specimens unverified to this day. So where exactly did these collections come from? And what untold, horrifying tales lie behind them? Today, 11 will talk to you about the Merlin Museum. The museum's founder, Thomas Merlin, has left no historical trace whatsoever. But from the excavation site of the museum, notes found at the time, we have pieced together traces of Merlin's life. Merlin was born in 1782 in northern England and grew up in an extremely wealthy family. Merlin's father shared the same interests as Darwin, loving to collect around the world mysterious or unknown biological specimens. Perhaps Merlin was influenced by his father and loved these things from a young age. Many of the specimens now housed in the museum were collected by his father during his explorations. In his diary, Merlin stated that, compared to the mysterious species he displayed, he seemed to prefer the process of exploration itself. His findings, for reasons unknown at the time, were never made public. More often, he shared them with his friends. To study these mysterious species, the most eye-catching of was the vampire's skull. And the story behind its acquisition dates back to 1780. According to records, initially, only one Swiss internist, Francis Berger's collection. Berger, also like Merlin's father, shared the same hobby. Since 1776, Berger continuously commissioned hunters to provide him with numerous complete bodies of great apes and conducted research for many years. But his research faced a great deal of criticism, responsibility, because most of his work was done through thought. However, among a batch of great ape remains, a fragment of a bull's skull was discovered, which further piqued Francis Berger's interest. At the end of 1780, Francis Berger once again discovered an unusual skull among the remains. Unfortunately, the brain tissue was already gone, and the state of decay was quite severe. Even the teeth on it were damaged to varying degrees. Because of this, the skull appeared to be extremely unique in shape. The upper teeth expanded into a serrated shape, and there were two special teeth hidden in two crevices of the upper jaw, which could freely extend and retract. This discovery greatly surprised him. This was not the skull of an ape. Such a dental structure involuntarily reminded him of vampires. In legends, vampires feed on the blood of humans and animals. These mysterious creatures are said to possess a pair of retractable fangs. Therefore, Francis immediately contacted the person who sold him the skull and learned that the skull was discovered in a village on the eastern shore of Lake Baikal. He then packed his belongings and embarked on a long journey to that place. As soon as he arrived, after some brief inquiries, he learned that a vampire attack had occurred there not long ago. The locals called the blood-sucking creature a blood demon. During the attack by the blood demon, people killed it and cut off its head. They buried the body in a grave and used a cross to suppress it. Francis offered a large sum of money and negotiated with the locals. The locals handed over the remains to Francis, but soon after studying it, he found out that it was not the legendary vampire, but rather an ancient type of hominid. However, this did not dampen Francis's enthusiasm. Through continued exploration and research, he discovered that the reason vampires could live so long was because the cells in their bodies were different from those of humans. Their cells would split into new ones just before aging or dying, thus constantly renewing vitality. And their cells, unlike those of humans after death, would not be decomposed by nature, because vampire blood and saliva contain a unique virus that could be transferred to humans, whether it was for the pursuit of immortality or simply the love of exploring the unknown. Francis set off on an even longer journey. According to records, Francis, on his way back to Rome, one night passed through a deserted marketplace. Suddenly, a tall and strong man with a pale face silently appeared in front of him. The man wore strange clothing. He told Francis he was a vampire from the distant Altai Mountains. After some communication, the man agreed to take Francis to visit the land of vampires. The two of them walked for several weeks, and finally, one night, reached the depths of the Altai Mountains, where the vampire city was located. The whole city was eerily silent, but it still appeared extremely luxurious. Later, after returning, it was said that Francis had also obtained immortality, and the vampire specimens he had collected eventually ended up in Merlin's collection. Not only that, Merlin also collected werewolves. In Merlin's museum, a werewolf cub's remains, curled up in a glass container, had been dried and made into a specimen. The werewolf's blood and tooth samples were stored in a nearby wooden box. There were also many winged human rib bones. There were also a large number of heart sea bones with wings. According to records, these sea bone specimens were collected from uninhabited areas of the Amazon, and all of this above is just the tip of the iceberg of the Thomas Maryland Museum collection. However, the most puzzling thing is Maryland himself. He was not only passionate about studying mysterious phenomena, but also had an extraordinary understanding of black magic and alchemy. Back then, after someone accidentally exposed Maryland's collection of specimens, many science-oriented citizens and scholars vehemently opposed Maryland, believing he was a fraud and a charlatan. For a long period afterward, Maryland even brought out some of his precious specimens to exhibit in the United States. However, he was heavily criticized, and many newspapers of the time published unfavorable articles about him. At that time, Maryland was said to be 40 years old, deeply affected. He disappeared from public view and never appeared again. However, more than 40 years later, Maryland, who was supposed to be 80 years old, appeared in the public eye once again. The media once again reported on his collection. It was then that people noticed that this 80-year-old Maryland had not aged a bit from 40 years ago. In the decades that followed, Maryland often attended academic conferences. Scholars were shocked to discover that his academic achievements were also incredibly deep. Until 1942, Maryland made his last appearance. At that time, an orphanage in London was in urgent need of space. A 40-year-old man walked into the director's office and claimed he could donate a mansion left by his ancestors to the orphanage. The donation was completely free of charge, but there was one condition. The mansion could never be used for commercial purposes or be resold, and the door to the basement must never be opened. The director eventually agreed to the donation and kept his promise, and the signature on the contract was actually Maryland's. At this time, Maryland would have been 160 years old. How did he manage to look exactly like a 40-year-old man? Since then, Maryland completely vanished again, until 18 years later, when demolition work in London revealed items that had been buried underground for hundreds of years, back into the light of day. However, to this day, the authenticity of these specimens still remains to be verified. Many believe that what we know about the world is only a tiny part. If these specimens are real, they could lead us to a far more authentic world. Others say that all of this is fake. Perhaps one day in the future, the fog will be lifted. What do you think? Are these specimens real or fake?